Well, we're at the end. We're at that point of beginning to look at what it is that we have actually learned, and at the same time, learn about 3 more of the 7 deadly sins. And as I said, when we begin to look at these 3, I think you're going to see the same as I do, that they start coming together. You know, we had learned in the past couple of weeks that the 7 deadly sins, in their nature when they start, are basic, simple emotions. They are emotions given to us by God. We had talked that pride is a feeling that God has given us to motivate us and to positively reinforce our spiritual gifts. So what we're good at, when we're successful at it, God gives us that little moment to go, wow, amazing, I didn't think I could do that. And it motivates us to do more. Well, that was the intent. Yet, we discussed that we tend to turn pride to ourselves, and we turn it away from God, because then it becomes conceit, and when conceit is in charge, God is pushed out. Envy is sometimes that challenge in our lives where we see something that is somewhere else and we desire to have that accomplishment. Sometimes that envy is, I wish I had the faith of Billy Graham. I wish I could send a message in song like Toby Mac. I wish that I could do it. So that envy is your challenge to grow your spiritual gifts. Yet, we discussed that sometimes in its simplest state, that desire to achieve higher success instead becomes, you have it, I want it, and I'm not working for it, and I want it now. And when that happens, the envy becomes the sin. God has not given us those gifts for a status in life, so motivation can turn into hate and into anger. We said anger goes from an emotion of release. Some of us have a trouble with anger because we bury it inside, we bury it inside, we bury it inside, and we never let it out. And it eats us up. Some of us finally reach the point that we let it out and never have a filter at all. We don't even give it 10 seconds because the pastor said, I need to let it out. And so we let it out in front of others, and we hurt somebody's emotions because our words get out before we filter them. Anger was intended to be used in a godly way. Well, how can anger be godly? We talked about that. When Christ overturned the tables, he was justifiably angry. But he did no personal harm to those there. Yet the story of Cain and Abel shows just the opposite. Envy, anger, take over, and murder is the result. We need to put into place a way that this relationship we are to have with Jesus Christ allows us to have these emotions and not let them become sin. In either way, sloth or busy, as we closed out with a week ago, basically all of those, it becomes about me and not about what God wants us to be. But you don't understand, I'm angry. You don't understand, I want to rest. You don't understand, I want to have what they have. You don't understand, I deserve to be proud of myself. Wow. Where was God in any of those? And yet God gives us those very emotions. So today we close out with lust and gluttony and greed. And you know, each one in and of itself could probably be a series. Because you could break down the list of things for which we lust, and lust immediately always becomes sexual, and the Bible refers to it that way. But sometimes lusting for somebody else's automobile or home is just as bad. Maybe we throw that in the category of envy because it's not sexually related. We have gluttony. And the Bible generally refers to that in reference to food. But yet, don't we seem to always want more and more and more of a lot of things? Well, then Rick, that must be greed. No, greed is whatever I have, I'm going to keep it, I'm not going to share it. So when you begin to look at this, it really comes down to what we have in common here. All three of these, lust, gluttony, greed, and the previous four, are about me. All about me and you. We want to change that. We're just never satisfied with what God gives us. We just have to show everybody that we know better. You know, lust is usually considered bad. And yet, many of our marriages suffer from the lack of it. Many of our young people are a year or two into marriage, and they are so busy in this world that you talk to them and you find out they have no personal relationships whatsoever except dinner and Friday night with their friends, where they probably sit around a table at a restaurant texting each other. Lust as a sin is outside of marriage. If that marriage relationship has become so stale and that really the only thing that matters is the TV, the computer, or whatever else, or maybe particularly one of the two spouses is finding their reward in the TV, the computer, or someone else, then lust has really become one of the deadly sins. Because now it has become a focus outside the marriage, and it is taken away from what God has blessed. Instead, when we could turn to our spouse in those opportunities, and we could turn to them, and instead of seeking that reward elsewhere, why not seek it with them? Why? Because maybe we haven't taken the time to build enough trust and respect in that relationship where we can go and say, you know, you might think this is a little weird, but this is what I've been thinking. Lust is when it becomes about me and not about God and God's special relationships that He has for us. Now, what about those who are not married or who are outside of that? Well then lust becomes the one focus in life that seems to be the only source of happiness. In fact, if you listen to the media or read a magazine, generally I think it seems to be impossible that anyone in our society can be happy and successful without a sexual relationship. Beginning at age 10, if you want, I guess. It's just amazing. Well, what do you expect of those people? They need to be happy. I always challenge folks. I said, that's really interesting because I don't see people nearly as concerned about those folks who are widows or widowers. I don't see anybody running around saying, well, we really need to get them kind of hooked up with somebody because they need to have a relationship. See, isn't that interesting? Because if it is the most important thing in the world, then it's the most important thing in the world for everybody. But what's most important is our relationship with God and what God calls us to do and to be in relationship and doing. In lust, we wonder why we're never happy and satisfied. Because it's back to what we want and what we see as the way it's supposed to be. Think about it though, is gluttony is it any different? Food and water are needed to survive, but survival isn't enough for us. It's not enough. I can't have just that. I mean, food and water can be so much more. You know, we're the only species who, for these two sins, we recreationally can have sex. And we recreationally can eat. You know, the deer and the birds are not eating their miseries away. You know, the robins are coming out at springtime and they're coming out and the snow is melting and they're going out, man, I'm going to eat as many worms as I possibly can because I'm so depressed from having been shut in all winter long. And on top of it, my little birdie spouse is just a pain in the neck. I can't talk to him. He's a knucklehead. So I'm going to go eat as many worms as I possibly can. We're the only species that can do that. And there's a reason, though. We can, you know, birds can't go out and say, oh, man, I'm going to have fried worm tonight. Or I'm going to have grilled worm tomorrow. They don't get to say that. We, on the other hand, can cook a piece of salmon 20 different ways. God gives us an ability to be able to take what we need for survival and use it a little for pleasure, and yet still have enough to share. But it's not good enough. We want it all, and we want it now. We have a society, we often talk about the society in Europe, and I can remember as a kid when I took French class, and you're learning, and you hear about young kids who are drinking wine at dinner, and all of this is like, wow, it's awful, you know, I can't believe that, I don't understand it. Yet there appeared to be, at that time, there was less alcoholism in Europe than there was in America. America has succeeded to pass alcoholism on all around the world, and in many cases, that alcoholism is a biological response to the alcohol. Yet in some, it is like the gluttony of food and drink, that we take it because it's our emotions, or we take it because, or as our college kids say, I'm just going to drink to get drunk. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to drink to get drunk. Why? Because I'm going to have fun. I'm going to throw up the rest of the night. I'm going to fall down. I'm going to cut myself. I'm not going to remember it in the morning. But, you know, gluttony is fun. How many times guilty as charged? You know, you go to the buffet and you go through and you only eat a little bit. And you sit there and you're telling yourself, you know, I'm really finished, but I'm not getting my money's worth. You spent your 10 or 15 bucks or 30 bucks if it's one of the big seafood ones like Captain George's or whatever down the ocean. And you can get all the clams and crab legs and all this stuff. That's probably the buffet I prefer. But you go there and you get all of this and you go, you know, you think because you go eat more that somehow you spent less. I haven't figured that one yet, but I've been there, done it. I've said it in my lifetime, I guarantee it. We take things that is just not enough. Even when God allows us, in these two particular sins, lust and in gluttony, to be able to create and use it beyond just basic survival. But it's just not enough. Because we want to be in charge. We know what's best. And then there's greed. The real problem. And finally, that real problem is probably the root in all of it, although we said pride was, but greed can be there. I want it all and I want it now. We'll never forget the time that, I think it was our oldest child, that when we said prayers together on one night, and she sat there, and we each had them pray, and she said, Lord, it was near Christmas time, make Christmas special or something along the lines. I'm going to have to paraphrase, I don't remember it all, and make us realize it's more than just gimme, 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 gimme. Well, prayer time or not, I was no more good because I'm rolling in laughter at the end of the bit, because it was kind of an exaggeration of what Daddy and Mommy had been saying about it was more than just gimme, 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 but she added a whole lot more. But isn't that where we are? You know, I can afford a house, and I'm going to get a house, but I can't just get that house. I have to get a house that makes it so hard for us to pay the bills that we are stressed and arguing with one another, and we can't put any furniture in it, we can't go out to dinner, we can't go to the movies, we can't do anything fun, but we've got the big house. Because we've got to have what everybody else has. We can't live in that neighborhood, we got to live in that neighborhood. Now there's two in the middle that we could choose, but we're not. You know, I need furniture. But what would people think if I bought my furniture at somewhere other than the best stores? I mean, I couldn't buy it at that store. Even though I don't have the money to go buy it at Ethan Allen, that's where I'm going to go. And what about our clothes and our shoes? Heaven forbid. You know, it was interesting when I started teaching. I guess growing up in Jessup, it was a lot better place to grow up than what I thought, because I didn't know what an alligator on your shirt meant. I really didn't. I was at naive, graduated from college in 1977. I went to work, and by 78, I was working with a young lady who grew up in Milford Mill. Trust me, she knew what an alligator on a shirt meant. And she knew what docksiders are. I didn't, now I wear them all the time when I'm not in boots, and I'm like, Docksiders? But it was a brand. I thought it was just a type of shoe. But this idea that this other part isn't good enough. And I would dare say that our biggest area of greed for today is our cell phone. We have people who are not meeting their bills because they must have a Samsung iPhone 61282. Now I just put them all together. I'm not really that tech challenge that I don't know. But they got to have the everything phone, and they got to have a data plan that's that big. Now you're talking to a guy that's got a pretty good sized data plan, and he's got an iPhone 5. Okay, so don't think that I'm beyond it. But we have kids who can't survive. You can't just give your kid a cell phone to call home. Oh, how dare you! It's got to be this phone. And is it really their desire for the phone, or is it their desire to be equal to somebody else? It's greed. We have to realize we can't have the same things that Bill Gates has. Surprise! It's just not possible for all of us. And you know, at times you may have to settle for the Chevy, Ford, Dodge, or the Toyota instead of the Lexus or the Infiniti. I'm not saying you have to ride around a car that's going to fall apart and leave you on the road, but you need to begin to decide, is this within my means? Or is this greed saying I've got to have something that I really can't afford? This Lexus, this obsession, Rolls Royce, the Ferrari, whatever it is this what we take on? And what we give up for the cell phone, for the house, for the furniture, for the car, is no retirement fund. No ability to tithe. No ability to create a good relationship at home because the funds are so tight and so strained because we just gotta have. We just gotta have. That's what lust is. I just gotta have. I just gotta know. I gotta know what it's like. I read that and I hear that when I'm doing high school ministries and college ministries, when I was doing FCAs, and kids would say, but don't you ever wonder what it's like with somebody else? Okay, yeah. But you know, I also wonder what it's like to walk on the moon. Well, that's ridiculous. No! It's a matter of putting your life into perspective, taking these 7 deadly sins and say, are they emotions or are they sins? Are they for God? Is it within our marriage? Is it eating to enjoy and have relationships? I mean, Christ met with his disciples. The Last Supper was at the table, eating. You go to the Korean Methodist Church or Korean church, and you will not have worship without a meal afterwards. Eating is not the problem. Gluttony is the problem. Even though the Methodist Church would probably disagree. Here it is on tape on DVR, like I say. A glass of wine may not be the problem. Gluttony is the problem. Greed is the problem. I want it all, and I'm going to give it. I'm going to keep it to myself. There's just not enough to go around. So what we know is that in the early church, they looked closely at the Bible. And they went through the Bible, and they took it, and you will not find a chapter on the 7 deadly sins. I won't find it. However, each and every one of the 7 deadly sins is listed, and we have listed scriptural references to each and every one of them. And the early church, they went through and said, what is it that people are most struggling with in their faith walk? Well, how can we help them? And so they went through and they came up with this list of 7. It went through a couple of revisions. So we want to look at it this past week. And there are some helpful notes here in your bulletin to go through some things. And they said, you know what, I think we can narrow it down to these 7. These 7 deadly sins are rooted in the basic sin of us playing God, which is really the root of all sin. It's when we decide that we know better than what God does. We want what we deserve and forget that what the Bible says we deserve is death. Now, I'm not saying you should drop dead, be struck by lightning and all that, but it means death. It means we should pay the price for the life that we're living. But yet, even though that's what we deserved, God gave us forgiveness. Through the grace of Jesus Christ, He gave us forgiveness. But yet somehow we know better, and God gets to ride in the back seat. Or gets shoved off the seat altogether. You know, we start, in fact, when we live the 7 deadly sins, we turn around and then we start blaming God. Why is my life a mess? What am I doing wrong? And He's going, well, let me see. Instead, He's offering us the forgiveness. The 7 deadly sins, or what we all have to do, is let Christ have that seat of control at the center of our lives. Luke 12 and verse 15, we read this. We read earlier. And He said to them, take care. Be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life, listen carefully, for the one who dies with the most toys wins. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Thessalonians. For this is the will of God, your sanctification. The will of God is to be sanctified. And in Methodism, said we believe in 3 forms of grace. And sanctified by grace is the grace that grows us in the relationship with Christ. It's to be sanctified, is to be in full relationship with Him. And that you abstain from sexual immorality. That each one of you know how to control your body in holiness. That goes beyond sex. Control your body in holiness. In other words, in things honorable to God. And in honor. Not in passion of lust like the Gentiles who don't know God. But Rick, they do it over there. Paul said in this letter, he says, not like them over there. Even though that's what they're doing. You know God, you know better. And then in Romans 12, in 1 to 2, and that was the one that we read, and I want to close with it. It tells us the steps of how to know God's will for you, for your life. And Paul writes this to the church at Rome, which is really interesting because Romans 12 was a chapter, was in my morning Bible study this morning that I'm doing. It says, therefore I urge you, my brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. Each and everything you do in your life, with what you have left, with whatever God has remaining in your body, it should be a living sacrifice to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by renewing your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. When we reach the point that our bodies, our lives, our gifts become a living sacrifice to God, and we are glad to bring them to the figurative altar and give them to God, then guess what? That's when the 7 deadly sins have become reined in. Are they ever going to go away? No, they're not. But our goal, as John Wesley says, we are going to perfection. We are achieving sanctification. We are pursuing holiness. Our goal is to take each and every one of them and rein it in so we become a living sacrifice.